Welcome to Women Getting Lit, books with benefits for women over 50. Women Getting Lit is a book review podcast for women over 50 who prioritize their health and well-being. We're your hosts, Jennifer Hassey Morris and Sherry Israel, co-founders of Aging Greatly Enterprises. Aging Greatly supports women over 50 with practical strategies across 5 essential pillars for longevity and sustained quality of life as you age. Through our programs, coaching, and our community hub, you'll discover that aging greatly isn't about following someone else's formula. It's about designing a vibrant life that's authentically yours. Our mission is simple but powerful: to inspire you to add years to your life and life to your years. During this book review podcast, we'll give you a short overview of the book as well as some takeaways that you can implement right away. And today's podcast will be a little bit different format than we've done before because we're actually going to take you through each chapter, and you'll probably see why. The book that we're reviewing today is called The Second 50: Answers to the 7 Big Questions of Midlife and Beyond. The author is Dr. Deborah Whitman. I do want to set up a little bit about this before Sherry does give us a little quick overview of the book, starting with the title, The Second 50. And yes, 50 years. Could be 50 years. It's not outlandish to think about living another 50 years after you celebrate your 50th birthday. We know that dementia rates have actually been declining as people achieve higher levels of education and adopt healthier lifestyles. And we also know now that staying connected with friends, family, your community not only improves your mental health, but also leads to a longer life. So that is the starting premise of this book. What are the things that you can start thinking about now as you enter or have already entered midlife?
Tag on a little bit to what Jennifer just said. I had the very good fortune to know two of my grandmother lifetime. My paternal grandmother was born in 1915, over 100 years ago. And in some ways, that seems really unusual for she and I to have lived in that same time frame of 100 years because it sounds so long. And yes, yet it really wasn't. In 1900, the life expectancy was 47 years. By the time it was 1915, my grandmother's year, the lifespan for a woman was 50 years old, and she did live to be 57. Today, women's lifespan is much longer, on average 81 years, and it is expected that children born today can live, 50% of them will live up to be 100 years old. The premise of the book, as Jennifer said, is that we have gained almost as much as 50 additional years compared to what my grandmother's lifespan would have been. Dr. Whitman, in her book, suggests there are 7 questions that we all should be asking ourselves at midlife and planning for those additional 50 years. The questions include, how long will I live? Will I be healthy? Will I lose my memory? How long will I work? Will I have enough money? How will I live when I die? The author doesn't offer questions or answers to these questions, but rather asks the questions that we should all be asking ourselves, and recognizes that the answers for each of us will be quite varied and might even change some over time. We are changing up our format just a little bit today. I do want to say that I think the book, from my perspective, is really good for someone at the early stages of 50 so that they can begin to plan for and have a lot of time to plan for those different elements. However, I would also say the book is really good for people like myself who are a little older than that, but haven't maybe addressed all those questions. So I do think the book is really good for multiple people. I would say that in my probably early 50s, mid 50s, my partner Roger made the comment one day, he said, we really should start thinking about the rest of our lives. We're probably only going to live another 15 years. I was like, wow. That I had been a caregiver for people. I'd watched people have illnesses, pass away, and so forth, but I never put myself on that aging timeline until that moment. So I do think the book is valuable for people in both age ranges. And it's a good launching point for really considering where you are and facing. The book is a good launching point for people both in planning at the age of 50, but also perhaps in preparing end of life questions and answers. Jennifer, what did you find most interesting or compelling about chapter 1 on How Long Will I Live?
It's interesting that Dr. Whitman starts there, right? Like really starting to think about how long you will live and adjusting to longer life expectancy. I was already aware of a pretty big discrepancy, at least in the US, about healthcare availability and affordability between the wealthy, the poor. And so certainly it stands to reason that there is in turn discrepancy in health span and lifespan. So part of the data that Dr. Whitman lines out is that in the US, wealthy men live as much as 15 years longer than the poorest 1% of men, and a wealthy woman will live as much as 10 years longer. So really startling to think about that just at a population level. Really boils down to a lot of what Sherry and I focus on in Aging Greatly, in terms of some of these healthy pillars. One of the biggest factors that the data would suggest in this health discrepancy actually is related to better education, which leads to better job opportunities and in turn, greater wealth and health care options, especially later in life. So certainly, those jobs that come with paid insurance benefits, affluent people tend to live in safer and healthier neighborhoods. I know that in terms of a number of chronic diseases, there certainly is data to suggest that you are more impacted by your zip code than your genetic code. So, in terms of thinking about healthy lifestyle choices just across the board, right? And we know that many of you listening to this are already doing a number of these things. It's why you're listening. You're already paying attention to your health. But even if you just boil it down to for the general population, healthy lifestyle choices, good diet, exercise, maintaining a healthy body weight, not smoking, limited alcohol intake, all of those add healthy years to your life predominantly by reducing the risk of diabetes, cancer, and cardiovascular disease. There's also a Harvard study that really found that people, even people who just practice one of those healthy habits, live 2 years longer, and women who practiced all five of those healthy habits by age 50 lived an additional 14 years versus people who didn't practice any of those healthy lifestyle choices. So again, related to what Sherry said, in terms of, the earlier you start, the more years it's going to add to the end.
The second chapter question was, will I be healthy? We know that lifestyle strategies and medications will not prevent us from aging or dying. But what the goal is to perhaps delay disease from happening in the 60s until perhaps 70s and 80s. You may gain extra time, extra years of being healthy. One of the things that really took my breath away in the book was a statistic she shared that in 2019, the average, just women, men and women, was 78.5, but her health expectancy at that time was only age 66. I was shocked about that. It is a time frame at where I am in life. And so I found that really shocking. Um, she also, I'm going to read a quote. She said 95% of Americans 65 plus have at least one chronic disease consisting of either depression, heart disease, and diabetes. And 80% have at least two or more of those. So again, depression, heart disease, or diabetes are the leading diseases that people have at that time frame. She also noted that these diseases are also becoming more prevalent in younger people. One of the biggest factors, she also shares a survey that says 93% of Americans say they want to live a longer, healthier lifestyle and that it's really important to them. And yet she questions, why is it that when survey responses are taken, the people who say it's very important to them report only 1 out of 10 report eating vegetables and fruits daily. So we have a ways to go in perhaps what we say is important to us and our behaviors and our lifestyle choices.
That's certainly what we hear, among, our community. Many of you will say, I know what I'm supposed to do, and still I don't do it right. Like really translating that kind of knowing, that knowledge, that education to forming that daily habit. The third chapter, question number 3, is will I lose my memory? Which is one of the things that I truly worry about because of having dementia on the female side of my family. So a study shows that just about 6 out of 10 Americans over the age of 40 think that mental decline is inevitable with aging. But even though 50% of people think they will develop dementia, in reality, only 15% of the population between 75 to 79 actually have mild cognitive impairment. The percentage of people 70 and older living with dementia has decreased. It was 13% in 2011, down to 10% in 2019, which I also see as good news, and I'm actively trying to be on the good side of those statistics. A 2020 report in the Lancet Commission reports there are 12 risk factors associated with dementia. So, according to a lot of the data, the book is Dr. Whitman's book is heavy on kind of showing you the evidence, kind of showing what you need to realistically think about, what you need to ask yourself. There is a growing body of evidence. I know that one of the books behind me on my bookshelf talks about how we can potentially cut, as much as 40% of dementia worldwide if we eliminated 12 risk factors. And some of them are risk factors that you might not have thought about. So just give you a quick list of those. So inadequate education. So if someone in your life, especially as they age, needs additional education for additional opportunity, think about that. Hypertension, hearing impairment, smoking, obesity, depression, not being physically active, diabetes, loss of social contact, excessive alcohol consumption, some form of traumatic brain injury, and the 12th risk factor is air pollution. So, really thinking about if any of those are part of your daily life, your daily experience, how you might need to really asking yourself those tough questions.
Or was how long will I work? And for me, I just say that I thought this chapter was probably the least expansive of all the chapters. She does talk about the fact that in the 1900s, people typically worked until they died. They only lived to be the age of 47, and there was no financial backup plan like Social Security. So it was really not an option but to continue to work. But as lifespans have expanded, Social Security came into place, the retirement age began to creep up. And so part of what she does address in the book is the fact that as we're looking at that next 50 years, we really have to consider what are our financial options and might there be ways to increase our financial well-being. A lot of people are working part-time or full-time past the traditional age of retirement at the age of 65 or 67 in that time frame. So a lot of people are doing those types of things. She also addresses that some people, as they leave the working world, they do a lot of volunteer work, a lot of caregiving and so forth. Thought was interesting that she commented on is more of an ageism comment, I thought, when she said that interestingly, people, when they retire, that the word retire can be problematic because people in society, especially those who are young or not in retirement, will see it as something where we have withdrawn from something we no longer do, and that it implies a deficit rather than, in fact, being a renewed engagement of a really active life. But yet, so many people in the retirement age go on to do so many more things, whether they continue to work or they travel or they volunteer or whatever it might be. So I just found that a little bit interesting. She did talk a little bit about the importance of thinking about healthcare increases, not just the medical element of that. In a later chapter, we get more into this, but she also talks about you have to plan financially for how are you going to do your daily life if your physical self has limitations of some sort. So there's a cost that could be involved in that. And she talks about, factoring in your wants and your needs as you retire and so forth. So she didn't really get into how you might do that as much as things to perhaps consider about evaluating when you might retire.
Which leads right into chapter 5, which is, will I have enough money? So great connections. Many people do connect that, retiring or, working to a certain age so that they do have enough money. And predominantly thinking about the costs that would be associated with aging. So again, relating to if you're on the younger side of 50, now is the time to begin considering some of those future medical care costs, caring for how you're aging and how those services could be financially purchased and maybe even pre-purchased. So assisted living, nursing home costs, all questions to really start thinking about. In that chapter, she does give some really practical information about how Social Security works. And certainly as we know, Social Security is likely to be revamped, but not to go away completely as many fear. There are 65 million Americans right now who receive Social Security benefits and 6 million who receive survivor benefits. So it is obviously a significant situation for many people. It is a part of your financial future. So making sure that you know your Social Security benefits, what you are entitled to if you are married, if your spouse should pass away, and really starting to think about your current costs and starting to estimate what you feel like your future budget might look like. A lot of that can be pretty overwhelming, but having a plan getting started can be really helpful.
The question, what the chapter was, where will I live? I thought this was really an outstanding to provide some really significant things for someone to think about. 75% of the people who are 50 and over report they would like to stay in their homes and their communities as they age, as opposed to having to make a move. I did not find that so much surprising, but what I did find truly surprising was that she says that 1% of the single family homes, only 1% are fully wheelchair accessible, and only 4% are easily. I was really surprised by that. I thought that those numbers would be higher. Modifications are called universal design, and it refers to buildings and environments that are made to be more accessible for people with disabilities or age issues. Now, my partner and I, we have actually taken that into consideration. And as I said, back in my 50s, he caught me off guard, and we decided to make our home much more accessible for aging. So we've done a number of these suggestions that she had in the chapter, but I wanted to share those because I do think they're significant. Because I've also been in a situation where I did get caught off guard and we didn't have any of these things in place. It was very, very difficult. So adding grab bars in your bathrooms and in your hallways would be one great move. And by the way, I would just say that I was very resistant to such things because I always thought they were a little ugly, but now they make them really pretty and very decorative, and they look more like a hand towel rail than it does a grab rail. And we actually find we do use these based on some little health issues where hip replacement and things of that nature. But adding raised toilet seats, replacing your doorknobs and putting those lever doorknobs, because as people get older, their hands don't grasp as well. So these allow an older person to push down and access and able to go in and out of a door. Walk-in showers with built-in seating are really nice. Again, it can be very difficult for an older person if they're trying to step over a bathtub. So adding a shower is a great idea. Widening your hallways and your door frames to be 36 inches. I learned during one of those caregiving experiences that most exit doors are 36 inches, but most interior doors are only 30 inches. Some of them are as narrow as 24 inches. You cannot get a wheelchair through there. You may get a walker if you've got the right size, but a wheelchair will not go through there. And we spent a good amount of time chiseling out a door who was injured in a wheelchair through the doorway to access a bathroom. The other thing that can be really valuable is having zero or no step entryways, both coming into a home or going into the shower. So those are all things that you could potentially do to your home to make that more accessible to stay in place. Other questions that I thought were really valuable that she asked was, who will assist me when I need help or if I need help as I age? How will I get to the grocery store or the church or somewhere else if I no longer can drive myself? Are these necessary resources? Are there necessary resources accessible? What sort of transportation might I need in order to make those things available? Do I have the potential to live in a multi-generational home with my family or perhaps with a group of friends? Or perhaps assisted living would be something that might work to make life more easy. How would I pay for these services? Was her final question.
The question number 7, it might sound like an existential question, but how will I die? In this portion of the book, Dr. Whitman really recommends that we start thinking about this difficult question and defining what it might look like for yourself. It will likely include a discussion that you might want or need to have with your loved ones at some points as well. So here are a few of the important questions that she walks through in this chapter. If you could choose, where is your preference of places to die? Home, hospice, a care center? Who do you want to be present, if anyone? Do you have a medical and a financial power of attorney to make decisions for you when you are not able to? Do you have an advance directive outlining the kind of medical treatment you either do or do not want? How comfortable do you want to be? How do you want people to treat you? How will your funeral costs be paid? So, really tough questions. And having these conversations certainly can be difficult. You might want to consider ordering a document, a great document to follow. It's called 5 Wishes. It's very inexpensive. It's a great discussion guide that helps you in making your own plan and setting you up to have this discussion, this conversation with a loved one or loved ones. As of 2023, there are 10 states, plus the District of Columbia, that do have laws that allow for medical assistance in dying. And that might be something that is important to you. You might want to research that for your own state. We do know also kind of difficult things to think about, but when it comes to losing a spouse, older adults actually have a 66% increased risk of death in the first few months after a loss. Very surprising. I hadn't realized it was that high. You probably all know someone who is in that situation, maybe a grandparent, for example, but it was a little startling for me to see how high that percentage actually is. One of the things that we also know to be true is that when you are a caregiver, when you are caring for the health of another person, that tends to take a really big toll on the caregiver's own health, especially if that caregiver is also aging. So, tough things to think about. My takeaway, Sherry and I had already read this book. This is a very personal takeaway for you to think about. My husband and I are actually part of a friend group, a dinner group. We've been together for more than 15, nearly 20 years, actually. We meet twice a month, And we actually spent several months talking together about many of the seven big questions, several in greater depth than even the book goes into, such as the information on end of life planning. Nearly half of the group has the five wishes document and is working through that. As you can imagine, those are really tender and important conversations. I know that I personally have had a follow-up conversation, pardon me, with somebody in the group and really worked through some additional kind of legal and end of life planning that my husband and I will be doing. She is a retired nurse and had lots of questions and a couple other things, really to work on. Everybody in the group came away from this kind of several months of conversations and really working it out in a loving and supporting environment. Everybody came away with things that they wanted to work on or different conversations that they knew they needed to have with their family members. And I know that a couple have done that and then have come back and shared that with the group.
For me, I think I also identified with the chapters on where will I live and how will I die. I feel like Roger and I had pretty much walked through the previous chapters. But would say that those two pieces are hard, not just because they're emotionally difficult, but they're kind of murky in that, we don't really know what our future holds in the sense of choices about where I might die or what be happening. So all you can do is your best plans. I had already worked through with my family. They're aware of financial information. I have a trust that outlines a number of elements of what I want and where things would go, where my passwords would be kept, things of that nature. They have that information available to them. But what I still need to resolve is, what does it look like? Will I be living by myself? Will I be living with my partner? Will I be living with family? I don't know that yet. So I need to think about what would that look like, and what is my partner? How does he feel about this? So we're setting up the opportunity to have the same conversation Jen and Paul have already had. I have personally been waiting for years now for self-driving cars, and I have come to the conclusion they may not occur in my lifetime. Now, if I live another 30 or 40 years, maybe, but it would resolve a lot for me. But anyway, I recognize I've got some things yet to work on. I am an older mother. My daughters are a little bit younger. And I've begun to bring up a few things, but it does make them uncomfortable. And I plan to order the Five Wishes documentation and use that as a conversation piece because I think it will help them to be more comfortable. But we do need to have those conversations and have them be aware. And then I think those conversations are going to have to be something revisited over a long period of time because things can change. And at this point, as I said, it's murky, and it is for all of us. So things will be adjusted, but we can keep that conversation alive. So I think that's probably my big takeaway of what I would personally feel like I still need to do.
Great. Well, quite the way to end this book review podcast, isn't it? But we really do think you'll find value from asking yourself some of these questions. We are so grateful for you joining us on Women Getting Lit, Books with Benefits for Women Over 50. If we did share something that you would like to know more about, or if you're ready to think about some of these questions for yourself, we encourage you to purchase the book from the vendor of your choice. Maybe it could be a good book for your book group or a group of friends that you want to get together with and talk about. So, thank you again for being here. Follow us to make sure you get the next book review in a couple of weeks.